So I ask them to draw a circle under the arc and to just write the name of the symptom. Or I say, if you want to, just for fun, you could name it. Let's say, okay, we'll say it's a tight jaw, but let's say for fun, because let's imagine the client hates his symptom. So he names it jaws.
In this video, Rachel Walker will explain why we need to integrate parts work with EMDR therapy. We will talk about the importance of understanding attachment theory and the relationship between attachment theory and the AIP model. Rachel will talk about structural dissociation and the neurobiology of the window of tolerance. She will end her talk with a demo of how to do parts mapping. Rachel Walker is a licensed trauma-informed therapist and an MD-approved consultant. She is the 2021 winner of the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists Distinguished Clinical Award for innovative contribution to the field of trauma treatment. She is the creator of At the Crossroads of Trauma Therapy, a 5-day intensive training designed to help therapists master integrative approaches to treating trauma. She's also the author of the books Trauma Recovery Guidebook for Therapists and Trauma Handbook for Survivors. That's the book. And both books are available in English and in Spanish. Here is the interview with Rachel Walker. Rachel Walker, welcome to the Art and Science of EMDR, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, so let me just explain really quickly why I'm saying us. We are the EMDR learning community. We've been preparing this whole month for talking to you and learning, your book. I'm going to do this, so see the book, and learning some other, other materials that you recommended reviewing. And so I want to start by asking you about the integration of EMDR and parts work, and why do we need that? Why do we need parts work? Isn't EMDR powerful enough to help heal all our clients?
They do seem to give you that impression in the level 1 and level 2. And so for many years, I thought that that was the case. But then I discovered that no, it's not enough, especially for some of the most traumatized folks. And the integration of parts work basically helps EMDR be more effective and applicable to people all along the trauma spectrum. So it helps EMDR do its job, basically. So we want to think about it and also talk about it as an integration of interventions rather than a this or a that. I'll say that right off the bat. And the reason why we need it, why we need parts work as part of EMDR toolkit, basically, is because EMDR will stall out when there isn't sufficient adaptive information processing system. When you don't have sufficient resources internally, you don't have what you need to hook up to in order to process traumas. And that happens when a person didn't receive sufficient nurturing and care, basically attachment, when they were young. So what we've learned basically from a more integrative lens, where we're looking not just at EMDR, but also at dissociation experts and attachment research, is that the adaptive information processing system is basically seeded by secure attachment. And so when there are massive holes in the attachment in the history for a client, which there are for so many of us or so many of our clients, the ability of the adaptive information processing system to evolve in such a way that life hardships become growth points is greatly inhibited or depleted. And so we need parts work because Without a strong adaptive information processing system, what happens when we go for memories, negative memories, is that the client either floods and gets stuck in the material, and that's where we get this term of looping, right?
Right.
Or their defenses turn on in order to keep them away from that. And their defenses can take all kinds of forms, but one of the most extreme ones is they just don't feel anything. So you can't even light up the target because the brain and body of the trauma survivor is making sure that you don't get to that kernel of pain or discomfort. And
Is that a
so,
protective mechanism, what you just said, Rachel?
yeah, well, I call it defenses. That's the old word for it. But in the parts world, they tend to call them protectors. So definitely protective mechanisms. And we have a ton of them. I mean, the human brain and body is very, very creative with different sort of manifestations of ways to stay away from things that are too painful. And so when you don't have enough positive attachment, so you haven't developed a strong adaptive information processing system, bad events in life just remain feeling really, really bad. You don't have a way to, make sense of them that leads to post-traumatic growth. It just feels really bad. And so what parts work does that EMDR doesn't do, at least on its own, there's so much creativity going on in EMDR now. EMDR recognizes everything that I'm talking about now.
Yeah.
They're not idiots. We're not idiots. We all are learning the same story, basically.
Right.
So there's lots of adaptations going on, which is great. But one of the things that parts work has that they've been working on in that world for so much longer than EMDR is very gentle but potent ways of doing interventions that grow both attachment circuitry and adaptive information processing. And their interventions create more robustness in the areas where many of our clients are lacking in internal resources. And so the parts work just fills in lots of gaps, and basically it makes, when it's used really well and you get kind of more skilled at it, it makes EMDR much more viable, and it helps it to begin working again, where before the wheels were just spinning, or the client quit because you activated a memory and they were like, I didn't know it was going to be like that.
Yeah.
Phew, they leave, whatever. So anyway, we need it because most of our clients are somewhere on the spectrum of having had attachment disruption. Most of the people who come in who are really desperate, where things are falling apart for them, most of the time there's this underlying issue that makes using EMDR right away less viable than we would want. And then we need somewhere to go in order to get them more ready for EMDR.
Yeah.
So that's why we.
Rachel, in your
Yes.
trainings and in the 2019 EMDR conference, you talked about structural dissociation, attachment theory, and parts work. So, structural dissociation, can you talk a little bit about how that fits into the parts work and our work with our EMDR clients?
Yeah. So one thing to know about structural dissociation is that it is itself a very, very thoughtful integrative theory. So it's integrating attachment, neurobiology, learning theory. It's integrating so many things, and so the people who came together to kind of put these pieces together in a way that actually clinicians could use the information is very, even though in a way the theory itself has a lot of components to it, the application of the theory and the way you talk about it with clients is practical. And I think the reason I'm so into it is because I found that the map they came up with works, and I feel oriented, the clients feel oriented within it. So anyway, I do plug it in my trainings, and I do a whole puppet show around it. But let me tell you about the little narrative about how structural dissociation talks about trauma, dysregulation, parts work and attachment and how all that fits together. And so much of it I've already said, basically. So structural dissociation relies a lot on some of the basic data we know about autonomic defenses and window of tolerance and exposure to life-threatening or very frightening events, as well as living in an environment where that's going on all the time or it's intermittent. And the theory talks about the way the autonomic defenses go on really strong, and then if the issue that is causing them to go on isn't addressed, and actually they rely heavily on attachment here, they are talking about there's no nurturing figure to calm the distress of the infant or baby, not just remove the danger, but also to calm the distress. If that's lacking, if there isn't enough of it, what happens is that the body of the infant shoots up into hyperarousal, which puts their internal homeostasis at danger because you can't stay hyperaroused for very long. We have a kind of internal structure amongst organs that require us to be calm enough, for example, for digestion to be turned on. Right. So regardless of external dangers, a baby is in danger if they're in hyperarousal for too long. And so what happens is that without the presence of someone there to calm the baby's brain and body is left to have to do that on their own, or the survival of the body is at risk from the inside. Yeah. And so what happens is the brain has a couple of automatic shutoffs for hyperarousal, and those turn on, one or the other of them turns on, and the baby will come back down into the window. However, the science across the board, this is Western medical science as well as neurobiology, like people who go way into the, the microbe, the very small details. It's pretty much known now that when those automatic shutoffs are used over and over and over again, they begin to hyperfunction, and that sends the baby not just into the window of tolerance, but the parasympathetic is over functioning now, and the down regulation goes down, 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 down until they're in hypoarousal. And so then the baby is now in an environment where they're going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. Structural dissociation also lets us know that there's a third way that the baby can regulate. And that way is the baby can turn away and hyper-focus on something else and tune out their environment and tune out the internal signals that are, flashing that there's a danger. So they can tune out all of those signals, internal and external, until all that noise is getting very, very distant. It's like when you hyper-focus on a book, or you're really on your phone on the subway and you don't even hear the noise or see the crowd. It's that same function, being able to focus very, very sharply on one thing and tuning out all kinds of other stimuli. Babies can do this too, and when they do it, the brain stops registering that there's any threat, and it will turn off the autonomic defenses, and the body will come back down into the window of tolerance.
Yeah, so I want to ask you something. When a baby lacks a nurturing figure, they are not developing the ability to regulate.
That's right.
And my question is, what do we do about it? How can we help our clients who didn't develop this ability to regulate as a baby? What do we do with that in session?
Yeah. So you're getting ahead of my explanation. So let me finish talking about structural dissociation. And the cool thing about structural dissociation is it has a built-in resolution. Mm-hmm. And that built-in resolution has everything to do with introducing parts work. So let me see if I can get to your question by just finishing my my previous line of thought. Okay, so the baby can turn away and hyper focus on something else and tune out what's upsetting them, and that will regulate the arousal, the sympathetic. It will regulate the sympathetic arousal. Parasympathetic turns on, and they come back into their window. So without a nurturing figure around, without intervention, the baby is then left to rely on automatics, shut-offs in the brain, which lead to hypoarousal, or turning away and tuning out their environment in order to regulate. So they're left with big swings, up, down, and turn away and tune out. Up, down, turn away, tune out. Up, down, turn away, and tune out. And they grow up doing this. In structural dissociation, what they talk about is the baby uses the turning away strategy to actually meet developmental milestones. So they have to be able to function at school. So they get better and better and better at tuning out what happened at breakfast time, all the fighting or whatever. So they learn to use that turning away strategy, in order to continue growing up and functioning out in the world. And it can get very, very extreme, and to the point where they're not even noticing internal signals around danger anymore. It can become habituated in the mind and the body. So they turn away at the brain just starts turning away at the first sign of any disturbance at all. So in structural dissociation, this pattern of relying on up, down, turn away, up, down, turn away, up, down, turn away, in order then to grow up and get through life, creates all kinds of symptoms and disturbances, including the very unusual symptoms we tend to see in psychosis, in DID. So it is the root function that's happening, basically, and Colin Ross talks about this. They are basically diagnoses of a dysregulation disorder, basically, an inability to regulate. So in structural dissociation, they tell us that the resolution to this, or the biggest thing you can do to help is, and this is where it's good to perk your ears up as a therapist, because this is our role. We want to train the brain that it's possible to turn towards what's upsetting and not dysregulate. And that it's possible to get more and more robust at peeking over there at what's upsetting and having it be not only effective, but feel good. And that little bit of teaching that we do when we introduce, and it's done through parts work. We basically say, let's imagine this is Rachel's languaging. IFS wouldn't like this languaging, but I'll just own it. It's mine. We just say, hey,
the IFS police, Rachel, the IFS police is not on the call. So.
Right. Richard Schwartz, are you out there? Anyway, we just say, let's just say that your tensed jaw that is keeping you up at night, this locked jaw you're having that the dentist told you need to go to the therapist and resolve because you have some somatic issue. I'm making this up. Yes. Let's just say that is just one part of who you are. It's not happening all the time. It's just one aspect of all of who you are. And let's just imagine that we could start getting some information about it and teach the brain to be able to look at it with some objectivity and some curiosity, some interest, and maybe, if we're really lucky, some caring.
That's IFS language, the C's.
Yeah, now we're kind of getting in there, right? Some curiosity, some caring. Let's just imagine this locked jaw is trying to tell us something. Would you be willing, client, to take a moment and do an exercise with me where we just experimented with this idea and see if it starts having some effect on your symptom? So I'm giving you a little example of the languaging of weaving in parts work into a client with a very intense symptom, where you sort of know from their history that most likely they have this up, down, turn away thing going on, and they need to get more robust before we can, process any traumas. Yeah. And so we need to start training their brain that it's safe and it actually even feels good to turn towards what's upsetting them and start getting to know it through a very different lens, a very different paradigm. And as many of us know, I don't know how many people here have experienced parts work, but it feels really good. It feels like a bath. I mean, it is a positive emotional experience to do parts work. It feels delicious. So it begins to train the brain away from being phobic of negative feelings and towards having a positive association with turning towards what's upsetting. And that's what we want. We want more, positivity around things that feel bad, interest in it, rather than immediate, phobic response of just defenses and turning away.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. And so one of the most interesting things that I found in your book that we kind of went over throughout the month. So this book is parts mapping, and I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about mapping and explain how you do that.
Yeah, so this is a good segue. So the way I work anyway is that after I've laid out that entering into a little bit of this parts work stuff may help with the symptoms. Are you willing to try? I like to have a structure that's very simple for the client to follow and super transparent. So I could say in just a few words or a few steps what it is we're going to do so they're not like kind of freaked out or phobic about it. And then we can do it. So mapping is really a way of turning towards one particular symptom and asking a series of questions about it. And the questions are not unique to me. They're used in structural dissociation interventions, dissociative table interventions. They're used in comprehensive resource interventions. They're used in IFS interventions. I distilled a few of them. So the mapping is all about the very first thing, the next thing you do after you've explained what you're doing and why, and asking if the client would be willing to try it, is you have them basically choose a symptom. And in my book, I have a little chart that sort of lays out the questions to ask, and the therapist would just be showing them the chart and asking the questions that are in the chart. Or the way I often teach it in my workshop is more drawing. We draw it together. We draw it out. It seems to be a little more engaging for the client than filling out a form, basically. So the mapping is all about turning towards a symptom and asking the same questions about that symptom that you would ask about any symptom. You do it over and over and over again. And I don't know if you wanted me to demonstrate it or just talk about it in general.
If you can make a little short demo, I think that would be
Sure. Okay.
that would be great.
I have my board here, which let me get my my screen so I can make sure I'm centering this well. So this represents a piece of paper, and one thing that's important about mapping is that the therapist not do it for the client. The client has to do it themselves for it to really work.
Okay.
So just a tip on that. And the reason for that is that you're actually stimulating metacognitive function in the client's brain, and they won't do it if you draw the map for them. So you have to say, this is the way I do it when I'm online, because we're all online, is I ask them to get a blank piece of paper and a drawing utensil or writing utensil. I bring out one myself and I go step by step through the steps which are in my book. They're very simple. I ask them to draw an arc at the top of the page and to write these words: observe, care, accept, and curious. In this arc, these are kind of adult adaptive information processing functions.
Yeah.
And so it's
that's metacognition, right? That's
right. It's also metacognition right out of the attachment field. Metacognition, the ability to see things from above and to accurately name and describe them. not to be, out in space about that, but to accurately name. And then let's just say we do have this jaw issue, and the client has said, yes, I'm willing to talk about my tight jaw. So I ask them to draw a circle under the arc and to just write the name of the symptom. Or I say, if you want to, just for fun, you could name it. Let's say, okay, we'll say it's a tight jaw, but let's say for fun, because let's imagine the client hates his symptom, so he names it jaws. I'm just having fun with this.
Yeah.
He's just, this is like a big shark that grips him at night. He's so sick of it. So let's say, I'm going to name it Jaws. Okay, let's call it Jaws. And then we ask the questions. And the first series of questions just has to do with describing it. So you say, well, in the inside of the circle that you've drawn on your own piece of paper, client, please write down what the sensations are that stand out to you, what the emotions are that come with it, and what are the thoughts that seem to come with this. And then the client on the inside of their circle says it out loud, but they also usually draw it. So he's like, it feels like heat in my cheeks or in my mandibles or something. He says the thoughts are like, let's just say he says, for some reason, I'm not okay. And let's just say he's got some fear that goes with it. The second set of questions, I ask them to write this word, the word helping, next to the symptom on their piece of paper. And this is very important because we're basically beginning to bring their attention into the trauma lens. The trauma lens is all the symptoms are happening for a reason. The reason is always the same, which is basically to help you survive and meet developmental milestones, grow up and fit in with groups, and also to protect the survival of your body. This is structural dissociation. So you just ask, if it were trying to help you in some way, how would it be trying to help you? We're metacognitiving it. If it were, and he says, oh, it's never trying to help me, it's Jaws. It just wants to keep me awake, I hate it. Say, well, but if it were, let's just imagine it were. Well, maybe it's trying to tell me that there actually is something wrong. Oh. Let's just say he says that. And then, as a therapist, you would ask the next question, which is, write the word risk under that and ask, well, if you didn't have Jaws letting you know that something might be wrong, what might be at risk for you? And let's just say the client just says, I wouldn't be safe. And in this case, in my little example, I would say, well, what might be at risk? Like, what kind of safety? And here the client usually begins to make associations to things that make a lot of sense to them. So someone might come into my room at night, like I might actually be physically in danger. Oh, let's write that. That makes a lot of sense. I would want to know specifically about the risk that's associated. And then in the mapping, I also ask, how long has it been around? So I call it this history usually. Yeah. I don't usually ask for specific memories. I just ask how long have you had Jaws around, letting you know something was wrong and protecting you against physical danger. And let's just say, oh my God, I think I remember the first time having a locked jaw when I was 4 years old. I just write that down. And then depending on the age of the client, I would say, so you've had this part of you letting you know that there might be physical danger in the night. Since you were 4, you're now 34. For 30 years, you've known this. What do you know tends to help soften it or just help it relax? I call this 10% solutions. This is not my phrase. I shouldn't say I call it. It's Janita Fisher's phrase. What do you already know about it that helps it to calm down? And the client tells you what that is, and you put everything they say, including a stiff drink before bed, including the bad habits that they've used to deal with it. You write everything down. You are basically very much respecting that they actually know quite a bit about it. In this case, maybe he says my jaw exercises, and let's just say he does say something like sleeping pills. You don't care about the good or the bad of it. You just are stimulating them to notice that they've lived with it a long time and they actually know something about what helps. So this is mapping in my world, in the way I map, and it is basically a stepping stone into what we would call IFS work, which is less cognitive, less external, and more internal parts work. And I like to have these stages of parts work, meaning first stage is just explaining what it is and why we would do it. Second stage is having a little exercise to give them a way in a very cognitive way that's not going to stimulate the disturbance.
Yeah.
To enter into it and try something. And third, to go from the page into the more formal, internal, what I call feeling parts work, where you're actually tuning into the sensation of your symptom and beginning to ask these same questions and learn not how to think about the answers, but how to listen for them.
Right.
That's
I think that's the real work. And even in EMDR, when we get to the real work, that's the work, right? Not the cognitive. We're bypassing the cognitive, all the defenses, all that. Rachel, that was great demonstration of the mapping. That's really helpful. I know a lot of people wanted to know more about it. So I want to give our community members a chance to ask you some questions. But before that, I want to ask you one more question, and that's, how do we get better? How do you think that EMDR therapists are, how can we get better at being EMDR therapists?
Oh my gosh, you're giving me a platform to say what I would love to say. I would say basically get trained in structural dissociation. Kathleen Martin in upstate New York teaches a combination EMDR and structural dissociation training, which is wonderful. Read the book, The Haunted Self, on structural dissociation. Also get a baseline education in attachment. There's a lot you can learn about it, but this is the book that kind of changed my practice. It's called Attachment Disturbances in Adults, and it's written entirely from the attachment lineage on how to work with trauma and dissociation from an attachment lens. You need to know what they know, I would say, and IFS, or some parts technique that would feel good to you. I would say those would be really good to know.
Yeah. And there's also, we can mention your training, right? So you have a training.
Oh yeah, come to my training.
Yeah.
Okay.
You combine all these things, right? In the training, structural dissociation and parts work and EMDR, and how to
that's right. And attachment. So attachment, structural dissociation, EMDR, and parts work. Yes, I weave them all together. You've gotten just a little bit of a sense of some of the stuff that's in the training, but the hope is that when you come out, you understand how all of them fit together, and it makes you much more clear-eyed in relation to the symptoms, and also clear-eyed in relation to how to proceed with a treatment. So anyway, yeah.
Rachel Walker, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Rodham.
And so the next part, we are going to have our community member ask some questions. That part will be recorded, and will be available only to our community members.
That sounds great.